Hi, this is Terry from Bonsai Tree, and welcome today to this episode, another episode on field growing. And today I'm going to show you how I would deal with the removal of a tree that I've grown for a number of years. Today I'm going to be removing a Trident maple that I've grown from seed. I can't actually remember exactly how long it's taken me to get to this point, but it's got to be at least probably about 10 years that it's been in the ground. And the season is now, because that's quite important to mention with Trident maples specifically, because they bleed a lot. It is spring now, a very early spring, and the buds are just starting to break on the tree. And knowing that I was going to remove the tree from the ground in spring this year, I prepared the tree in autumn of the previous season, the previous growing season, by cutting all the main branches, the trunk down, because with Tridents they do tend to bleed a lot. There's a lot of sap lost through cuts if they are made in spring, and I think that's just due to the pressure of the sap flow in this particular species. I think this is an exceptional case. Not all trees are like that, but certainly Trident maples will bleed. So today the first thing that I'm going to be doing is showing you the tree that I'm going to be lifting, talking very briefly about what it is that I'm going to do. Then I will demonstrate the technique and the process, and then we'll be taking the tree back to the workshop where I will be potting it up and then putting it aside to settle in. So I'm going to walk you through that process. Okay, this is the tree that I'm going to be removing today. As you can see, the trunk was chopped and some of the branches as well last season in autumn. So I did have that planning done. And so now we're going to, and let me just point out as well that it's a good time if you see the buds pushing from the trunk. That is a good time to lift the tree, because then you know that the sap is rising from the roots and is now present in the tree, and so that'll give the tree the ability to root itself once dug out of the soil. So the first step is now to dig around the tree, sever the main roots, and then it should be fairly simple to lift it out of the ground. I just want to show you this is a tile that's peeking out here. So when this tree was planted a number of years ago, it was planted onto a tile which has forced the roots to grow in a horizontal fashion, and then they grow down into the soil. There are multiple benefits to doing that. The one is, of course, that it makes it easier to eventually remove the tree because you can chop off all the roots. But it also means that, and then there will also be no roots underneath the tree, but it also means that the tree, the base of the tree, the buttress, flares out much better as the roots grow over the tile and then down into the soil. So that is a technique that I would encourage you to utilize in growing, particularly deciduous trees. I'm not sure if the technique is really used for conifers as well. Okay, so I've dug a trench around the tree, and because the tree was growing on a tile, the job is made a lot easier for me because I just need to sever the roots that are growing over the edge of the tile. And once that's done, you can very easily lift the tree, because there's not going to be any roots growing below the trunk itself. So as you can see now, the tree is completely loose, and we can now lift it out of the ground. So the tree is now out, and I'm now going to put it into a wet towel, and that's just to keep the moisture in the soil for the time that it's going to take to get home. We're back at the house again, and The next step is that I need to remove all the field soil. It's very clayey, it's going to be very water retentive, so that's not the type of soil that we want in a container. So I'm going to be using a pressure washer to remove the soil rapidly. So I've removed the field soil, and the next step is going to be to reduce the roots, which is a very important step. If you don't do this next step correctly, then you may lose a number of years or waste a number of years of growth, because if you're not aggressive enough with cutting the roots, then you'll have a problem with getting it into a bonsai pot down the line, and then you're going to have to recut the roots. So any new roots that grow from the old cuts will then be cut off again. So it weakens the tree tremendously if you cut and then have to recut after a period of time. It's the reason why we can be very aggressive with the root pruning is because the tree has been in the field for a number of years. So the amount of energy that it has is tremendous, and so you can get away with this harsh treatment that I'm about to demonstrate to you, but it's not advisable to do it repeatedly. As you can see, there was this major root that was cascading off the side of the tile, and I'm going to first cut this, and to do that I'm going to be using a saber saw. You can also obviously use a handsaw, but this is just going to be that much faster. The next step is, or the next root that I want to remove is this big root that's growing down at this angle here, and I'm using a root cutter to do this with. So the object is to try and get the tree to trim the roots of the tree to the angle that it's going to be planted at. It needs to be able to rest flat on the table when we're finished trimming the roots, and that is how you're going to, or how I'm going to plant it in the box that I'll be using. It's very important that you make your cuts at an angle so that the cut faces down and not up. If you make the cut at this angle, it's going to take a very long time for the resulting scar or cut mark to become invisible. But if you cut down, or if you cut horizontally or at an angle this way, so that the cut is facing down into the soil, you won't see that, and then the roots generally will issue from the edge of that cut and splay out in a horizontal fashion. So this is what I'm talking about, where you're making your cuts so that the cut is at the bottom or facing down into the soil. This is ideal, and then as I mentioned, you'll have roots coming out of this the edge of this cut. So as you can see, I have now cut the roots that the tree is now sitting level. So it's a little bit of a rock, but that's acceptable. And then this is going to be the front. This is going to be the front of the tree, somewhere in here. This is the back side. The roots are not great coming out of here, but I can solve this in coming growing seasons with doing some root grafts. But this is certainly the best side of the tree, and in fact, when it was planted in the ground on the farm, this was the side that was facing, or that was the front that I'd chosen when I'd planted it in the ground already. And it just so happens that the root spread in this area is also much better. These big areas over here can also be corrected with root grafts, but that's not something that I'm going to focus on doing now. At this point, it's really just to get it growing again after removing it from the field. Okay. The next choice that you need to make is what growing medium you're going to use. Now, generally, if you collect a tree from the wild, you're going to use something like pure pumice or hyuga in this case, which is Japanese pumice. The objective is obviously to get the tree to produce a rapid amount of roots in as quick a time as possible. And in order to do that, you need something that is very, very well drained, something that is going to allow a lot of oxygen to get into the soil. And obviously you're going to have to water more frequently that way, but generally, because the tree has just been collected, there are no roots, and so there's not going to be a lot of moisture loss through transpiration, because there's also very minimal foliage. And so in this case, we are going to use pumice and akadama. I'm going to be using both. I do want a little bit more water retention in the soil, and also something that's going to hold on to nutrients as well. So I'm going to mix these in, it's not an exact ratio, but possibly in equal portions, or maybe a little bit, say 2/3 pumice and 1/3 akadama, probably something around that. For your choice of container, you can, a lot of people prefer or do utilize plastic tubs and buckets and things. I personally don't prefer to use that material. I will either use wooden boxes or ceramic pots if I have something that is suitable. In this case, I'm going to be using this wooden box that I made up, and in fact there is there's another video that I did on creating or how to make a box quite quickly, so be sure to check that out. But I'm going to be using this box, and wooden box is great because it has very good insulative properties, so the heat transfer between the outside and the inside of the soil, particularly on those summer days. It doesn't happen so dramatically fast as it will, for instance, in a plastic container. And then also in the South African sun, where the UV factors it has to be considered as well. Plastic lasts maybe for a year or maximum 2, depending on if it's been UV stabilized. But most of the times the tubs that are used are not, and they become brittle in a very short space of time, whereas wooden boxes, especially if it's been treated, I know there is some debate with some people about the use of treated wood, sort of construction timber. I use wood that's been treated. I've never had a problem, never seen an issue with use thereof, so I use treated wood without any concerns. And so I'll be planting the tree into this wooden box. What is great about a wooden box is the fact that you can obviously build it to the ratios, the proportions that you want, and you never want to overpot the tree, because it's then going to, the medium is going to stay wet for too long. So you want something that's just big enough to put the tree into, and that will sustain a reasonable amount of development for at least 2 years, maybe 3 years, before you consider repotting it into a different medium, again more suited to the longer term development of the tree. Okay, so important to ensure that you've got wire stays to prevent the tree from moving once it's been potted. If there's any movement, you do risk the new roots from which are very brittle, that they break. So it's a good, and if the wind is strong enough, which certainly in the Western Cape, in Somerset West where I live, it certainly can become very, very windy, and the tree can be knocked out of the container altogether. I'm using a medium-sized pumice for the bottom or drainage layer of the container, and that's just to help aerate this zone in the container. place the tree onto the mound that you've created, and then it's important that you wiggle it down to settle it onto the media. You don't want any cavities below the root or below the trunk. Roots will not develop there, and that potentially could become a problem area. The other thing that you want to make sure of is that you've got more or less the same distance front to back and side to side of the tree to the walls of the container, so that you give equal opportunity for all the roots to develop right around the tree. Make sure of the angle that it's planted at before you tie down with the wires. The last step is just to chopstick or to work the soil, the growing medium, into any cavities between the roots. I finished working the soil in around the roots, and now the next step is to water it extremely well. What you want to do is make sure that the water runs clear from the bottom of the container, but I'm going to demonstrate that to you in a moment. Brings us to the end of this tutorial or video showing you how to collect a tree or dig a tree from the field and plant it up. Hope that you've picked up a few tips that you can use in your own field growing. I'm now going to take this tree, put it into a very shaded, very bright shade, so not direct sun at all, morning or afternoon, and then it'll also be placed in a position that is sheltered from the wind. The sun and the wind are the two factors that you need to protect the tree from at the moment. And then probably for the next month or so, it'll be kept in that environment. And then after that, I will move it to progressively more sun, depending on the tree's response. And then I will start lightly feeding it with a liquid organic fertilizer, and also give it a few, in fact, before the month is up, I will probably give it 1 or 2 treatments of kelp pack as well, just to help stimulate the root development. It's not a fertilizer, so it's not going to stimulate foliage growth. It's got no nitrogen value to it. So that will be used now, kelp pack, and then after that, after the month, I will start lightly fertilizing it. So then after that, we just see how the tree responds, and then the idea will be to the next step or the next phase of this tree's development will of course be to develop a new apex and also the structural branches. So that would be the next phase, and probably a subject for a future video. So thanks very much for watching, and I do hope that you have liked and subscribed my channel so that you'll be notified of any future videos. And once again, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.